The crystal chandeliers of Bellacorte cast warm light across the private dining room as I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, watching my family celebrate Dad's 60th birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd chosen the most expensive restaurant in the city for a celebration I wasn't supposed to be part of. "Sarah, darling, tell everyone about Marcus's promotion at Goldman Sachs," Mom said, her voice dripping with pride as she addressed my sister. Sarah beamed, launching into her rehearsed story about her husband's latest achievement. I picked at my $85 truffle risotto, listening to the familiar symphony of my family's accomplishments. My brother David was regaling the table with stories of his latest real estate deals, while my cousin Jennifer discussed her art gallery's upcoming exhibition. The conversation flowed around me like I was invisible, which I suppose was exactly how they preferred it. "And what about you, Emma?" Uncle Robert asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer would disappoint him. "Still working at that little marketing firm?" The table fell silent. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, another opportunity to highlight my failures. "Actually," I began, but Mom cut me off with a sharp wave of her manicured hand. "Robert, let's not ruin Dad's birthday with unpleasant topics," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I'd known since childhood. "Some things are better left unspoken." Dad cleared his throat, setting down his glass of $200 per bottle wine. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room," he announced, his voice carrying the authority that had built his successful law practice. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. After 32 years, I'd learned to mask my emotions during these family gatherings. "Emma," Dad continued, "your mother and I have been discussing your situation. We're concerned about the image you're projecting, especially at family events like this." "What exactly are you saying, Dad?" I asked quietly, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Mom leaned forward, her pearls catching the light. "What we're saying, dear, is that perhaps it's time you understood your place in this family. Or rather, your lack of one." The words hit like a physical blow, but I'd been expecting this moment for months. The subtle exclusions from family photos, the accidental omissions from holiday planning, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. "You see," Sarah chimed in, unable to resist the opportunity to twist the knife, "we've all built something meaningful with our lives. Marcus and I are buying a $3.2 million house in Westchester. David just closed his biggest commercial deal ever. Even Jennifer's gallery is expanding to a second location. And you," David added with a smirk, "are 32 years old, single, living in that tiny studio apartment, working at a marketing firm that barely pays your bills. You're frankly an embarrassment." The rest of the table nodded in agreement. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who'd once bounced me on their knees and promised I was special, all looking at me with expressions ranging from pity to outright disdain. "We've decided," Mom announced with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence, "that you're not family anymore. Not in any way that matters. You're welcome to keep the Sterling name, of course, but don't expect to be included in family events, inheritances, or decisions going forward." Uncle Robert raised his glass. "To the Sterling family, successful, accomplished, and finally honest about its standards." "To the Sterling family," they chorused, pointedly excluding me from their toast. I sat there for a moment, absorbing the weight of their rejection. 32 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had led to this moment. Part of me wanted to cry, to beg them to reconsider, to promise I'd do better somehow. That I smiled. "I understand completely," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Thank you for being so direct about it." Mom looked surprised by my reaction. She'd probably expected tears, drama, or desperate pleas for forgiveness. Instead, I reached for my purse and pulled out my phone. "Since I'm no longer family," I continued, "I suppose there's no reason for me to cover family expenses anymore." "What are you talking about?" Dad asked, confusion replacing his earlier certainty. I signaled to Marco, the head waiter who'd been hovering nearby. He approached immediately, his posture deferential in a way that should have told them something. "Marco, I'd like to make some changes to tonight's arrangements," I said clearly, ensuring everyone at the table could hear. "Of course, Miss Sterling. What can I do for you?" "First, please transfer the bill for this table to my account as usual, but going forward, the Sterling family will be paying their own way. Also, I'd like you to remove their names from our VIP reservation system. Marco nodded professionally. Understood, Ms. Sterling. Shall I also cancel their standing weekly table reservation? Yes, please. And Marco? From now on, they'll need to book like any other customers. No more special treatment. The color drained from Mom's face. Emma, what are you doing? I turned to address the table, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. What I'm doing, Mom, is accepting your decision. You've made it clear I'm not family, so there's no reason for me to continue subsidizing family gatherings. Subsidizing? Sarah laughed nervously. Emma, you can barely afford your own rent. What are you talking about? I pulled up my banking app and showed her the screen. Her laughter died abruptly. This is my personal account, I explained patiently. As you can see, I've been transferring $15,000 monthly to Dad's account for the past 3 years. That covers this restaurant's private dining room, the wine selections, and the monthly family dinners you all enjoy so much. David grabbed my phone, staring at the transaction history. This has to be fake. There's no way. Marco, I called, and the waiter returned immediately. Could you please explain to my former family who owns Bellacorte? Marco straightened, addressing the table formally. Bellacorte is owned by Sterling Hospitality Group, which is the flagship company of Sterling Enterprises. Ms. Emma Sterling is the founder and CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, Uncle Robert stammered. We researched this restaurant before booking. It's owned by some reclusive millionaire. Billionaire, actually, I corrected gently. Sterling Enterprises is worth approximately $2.3 billion as of last quarter. We own 43 restaurants across 12 cities, plus hotels, event venues, and commercial real estate. Mom's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. This is some kind of joke. I pulled out my business card holder and placed cards in front of each family member. Emma Sterling, founder and CEO, Sterling Enterprises. These aren't jokes. They're facts you never bothered to learn because you were so convinced I was a failure. Jennifer picked up the card with trembling fingers. But you work at a marketing firm. I own the marketing firm, I explained patiently. Sterling Creative is one of our subsidiaries. I told you I worked in marketing, which is technically true. I just never specified that I own the entire company. Dad was staring at his card like it might bite him. But your apartment, you said you lived in a studio? I do have a studio apartment. It's on the top floor of a building I own in Soho. The studio happens to be 3,000 square feet with a private rooftop terrace, but I've always preferred smaller spaces. Sarah was frantically Googling my name on her phone. Oh my God. Marcus, look at this. There are articles. Forbes mentioned her. How did we not know? Because you never asked, I said simply. You all made assumptions about my life and never bothered to verify them. When I mentioned working late, you assumed I was struggling to keep a low-paying job. When I said I was traveling for work, you assumed it was some small-scale marketing project. You saw what you expected to see. David was reading over Sarah's shoulder, his face growing paler by the second. It says here you were named Entrepreneur of the Year by Business Weekly. That was 2 years ago. We saw you at Christmas right after that happened and you never said anything. Would you have believed me if I had? I asked. Or would you have assumed I was lying to make myself feel better about my failures? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. Mom was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Why let us treat you like a disappointment? Like someone who didn't measure up to the family standards? I shrugged. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer. Turns out you're exactly who I thought you were. Uncle Robert was frantically calculating on his napkin. If you've been paying $15,000 a month for 3 years, that's over $500,000 just on family dinners. Plus the Christmas gifts, birthday parties, vacation contributions, and emergency loans that were never repaid, I added. I estimate I've spent approximately $1.2 million supporting this family's lifestyle over the past 5 years. The waiter approached with a leather folder. Ms. Sterling, tonight's bill comes to $4,200. Shall I charge it to your usual account or? Actually, Marco, table 12 will be handling their own bill tonight, I said, gesturing toward my family. Please present it to them. Marco placed the leather folder in front of Dad, whose face went from pale to green as he opened it. $4,200? He choked. The wine selection alone was $1,800, I explained helpfully. The Wagyu beef course was $200 per person. The private dining room rental is $800 for the evening, plus tax and gratuity. Sarah was frantically whispering to Marcus, who was shaking his head. David was staring at the bill like it was written in a foreign language. We can't afford this, Mom whispered. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said, standing up and smoothing my simple black dress. A dress that ironically cost more than most people's monthly rent, but looked understated enough that my family had dismissed it as cheap. After all, you're all so successful and accomplished. Emma, wait, Dad called as I headed toward the door. We need to talk about this. We can work something out. I paused at the threshold of the private dining room. Work what out, Dad? You've made your position clear. I'm not family anymore. That means I'm not responsible for family expenses, family emergencies, or family problems. But we didn't know, Sarah pleaded. If we'd known you were successful, you'd have treated me differently? I finished. That's exactly the problem, Sarah. Your love and respect were conditional on my net worth. Now that you know I exceed your standards, suddenly I'm worthy of family membership again. The room fell silent as they absorbed the truth of that statement. I built Sterling Enterprises from nothing, I continued. I worked 18-hour days, slept in my office, ate ramen for dinner more nights than I can count. And through it all, every family gathering was a reminder that nothing I did would ever be good enough for you unless it came with a certain income level and social status. Jennifer was crying now. Emma, we're sorry. We made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. Every snide comment, every exclusion, every eye roll when I tried to contribute to conversations, those were choices. The mistake was mine for thinking family meant more to you than money. I walked back to the table and placed a white envelope next to Dad's plate. What's this? He asked cautiously. A detailed accounting of every dollar I've contributed to this family over the past 5 years. Consider it a gift. When you're ready to repay me, you'll know exactly how much you owe. Mom opened the envelope with shaking hands and immediately went pale. This says $1.2 million. With interest calculated at prime plus 2%, I confirmed. Don't worry, I'm not demanding immediate payment. Consider it a long-term loan. Payment plans are available. David stood up so quickly his chair fell over. Emma, you can't be serious. We're family. No, I said firmly. You made it very clear tonight that we're not family. I'm simply treating this as the business transaction it apparently always was. I pulled out a business card and placed it next to the envelope. This is my attorney's information. He handles all collection matters for Sterling Enterprises. If you'd like to discuss payment arrangements, please contact him during normal business hours. The room was so quiet you could hear the crystal chandelier tinkling in the air conditioning. I'll be leaving for my house in the Hamptons tomorrow, I announced. I have a board meeting next week regarding our European expansion. After that, I'm considering relocating our corporate headquarters to London. Fresh start and all that. I moved toward the door again, then paused as if something had just occurred to me. Oh, and one more thing, I said, turning back to face them. Sterling Enterprises employs over 2,000 people across our various companies. If any of you are looking for work, real work, not handouts, my HR department is always accepting applications. Entry-level positions start at $35,000 annually. The insult hit its mark. Every face at the table registered the implication that they'd need to start at the bottom of my corporate ladder. Sarah stood up, her designer dress trembling with indignation. You can't do this to us. We're your family. You're right, I said with a sad smile. I can't do this to my family. But you've already clarified that I don't have a family anymore, remember? I walked to the door of the private dining room and paused to look back one last time at the people who'd raised me, dismissed me, and ultimately lost me. Enjoy your dinner, I said softly. And don't worry about the bill. I'm sure successful people like you will figure it out. As I walked through the main dining room of my own restaurant, I heard the chaos erupting behind me. Raised voices, frantic phone calls, the scraping of chairs as they presumably searched through purses and wallets for credit cards that might cover a $4,200 bill. Marco appeared at my side as I reached the exit. Miss Sterling, shall I ensure they have transportation home this evening? I considered this for a moment. 3 months ago I would have said yes, would have arranged for a car service to take them home safely. But 3 months ago, I was still pretending to be their disappointing daughter instead of their secretly successful benefactor. They're all adults, Marco. I'm sure they'll figure it out. He nodded professionally. Very good, Miss Sterling. Will you be dining with us again soon? I looked back toward the private dining room where I could still hear raised voices and what sounded like someone crying. Not for a while, I said. I think I need a break from family dinners. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. The weight of constantly trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it was finally gone. My phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a flood of them, all from family members who suddenly had my number memorized despite claiming they never had time to call. I turned off my phone and walked toward my car, a modest sedan that I'd deliberately chosen because it was practical and unremarkable. Let them keep assuming. Let them keep underestimating. Tomorrow I would fly to the Hamptons in my private jet, a fact they'd probably never learn unless they bothered to do more research. I would spend the weekend planning Sterling Enterprises' next acquisition and enjoying the peace of being surrounded by people who valued my mind, my vision, and my character rather than constantly measuring my worth against arbitrary standards. But tonight I would drive home to my tiny studio apartment in Soho, pour myself a glass of wine from my private collection, and reflect on the strange relief of finally being honest about who I was, and who they were. The last thing I heard as I drove away from Bellacorte was the sound of sirens in the distance. I wondered idly if someone had called an ambulance for Uncle Robert, who'd looked like he might have a heart attack when he saw that $1.2 million figure. Then I realized I didn't actually care, and that revelation was somehow the most liberating of all. 3 hours later, as I sat on my rooftop terrace overlooking the city lights, my private phone rang. It was Marco. Miss Sterling, I thought you should know. Your family is still at the restaurant. They've been trying to negotiate payment arrangements, but their combined credit limits don't cover the bill. The police were called regarding a possible case of fraud, but I explained the situation. What would you like me to do? I sipped my wine and watched the city sparkle below me. Marco, what do you think I should do? If I may speak freely, Miss Sterling, I've watched you take care of that family for 3 years. You've paid for birthday celebrations, anniversary dinners, holiday parties, graduation celebrations, and emergency gatherings. You've never asked for recognition or gratitude. Tonight they told you that you weren't family anymore. Yes, they did. Then I believe they should figure out how to handle their first independent family dinner without your help. I smiled. I think you're right, Marco. Thank you for the update. Of course, Miss Sterling. Will there be anything else this evening? I looked out over the city I'd conquered through determination, intelligence, and sheer force of will. The city where my family still saw me as their greatest disappointment. Actually, Marco, there's one more thing. Tomorrow morning, please send a fruit basket to the table. Make sure it includes a card that says, "Congratulations on your independence. Best wishes for your fresh start." Consider it done, Miss Sterling. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in 32 years, I was genuinely excited about my future. A future that would be built on my terms, with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide them. The Sterling family had made their choice tonight. They'd chosen pride over love, status over substance, and money over family bonds. I'd simply decided to respect their choice. And tomorrow I would begin building a new life with people who had earned the right to be part of it. The city lights twinkled below like stars, and for the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.